So everyone, welcome to our Art and Tech webinar. I'm Manuela, Seve, the CEO and co-founder of Alpha, and I'll be moderating today. We are joined by Thomas Galbraith, Gabi Trueba, and Renata, which you guys all know as my dear co-founder. So I'm gonna let them jump right in and introduce themselves. Thomas, if you could start and tell you a little bit more about, your involvement in the arts, how you got started, and maybe why art and tech is so important for you.
Sure. So I've been involved in the broader kind of luxury industry for about 15 years. Going back to actually working with insurance and luxury high net worth space. And from that, I then went into creating my own management consulting firm with a few other partners. And we worked across different sectors and verticals with a heavy focus in tech and art and luxury. On the back of that, I then worked, Google Ventures reached out and asked me to run, or maybe turn around is a better word, a company they were invested in Austin. They had been having challenges with the previous administration and needed someone to come in and fix it. So I left my management consulting behind because I thought that was too fun an opportunity to pass up. And as is the case with most things, through some combination of luck and skill, we managed to get the company back on track and sold, which then led to Hindman. They were looking for someone to essentially join their board. That turned into a conversation about being CEO. At that point, it was called Leslie Hindman Auctioneers, and they wanted someone to help essentially transform the organization. Through that 2-year process, we went everything from redeveloping and deploying the back end, the front end, restructuring the company, and growing revenue 200% in 2 years. And that's where I am. That's where I leave it now.
Fantastic, fantastic. Gabi, if you could tell us a little bit more about yourself, your involvement in the arts, why technology is important for yourself.
Yeah, sure. So I actually started out as an artist, as a painter in New York City. I graduated from NYU, and I was working in the art world. And I started working for Jeff Koons for a couple of years. And that's kind of how I think the first kind of spark of seeing how technology, additive manufacturing, 3D scanning was actually used quite successfully for art making and production. And so Jeff Koons is actually very famous for massive layoffs, which are a lot of fun. And so I was part of one of those massive layoffs, which actually changed my life. At the time, it seemed like a terrible thing, but he's like King Joffrey. He'll just like cut half his staff in half all of a sudden. So so that was actually an amazing opportunity for me, because that's when I started my company, WOMP. And so it was at the beginning, I was just exploring technology and art and how to make art through technology. And then it slowly turned into a technology startup based on the needs I saw that were in the market, especially for creatives, not only artists, but designers, but generally creatives that don't have the language of technology or think they don't. And so now our company's purpose is to bridge that that problem of people who are not engineers or mechanical engineers to be able to use 3D technology.
Yeah, we as a company know how complicated it can be to get your first 3D model done. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Renata.
Hello. So my background and how did I get to use art and technology through Alpha in partnership with Manuela. I have a more traditional art background. I studied art history, and I think when I started working in the market, I started feeling frustrated and seeing that like there are a lot of things that could have been improved through the simple use of technological tools that we're already using in different sectors. And I think that's what brought me together with Manuela. So back in 2014, 15, I think it was still quite rare to see people thinking the way we did. And the idea for Alpha was exactly this, to apply technological tools that we're already using other sectors into a very analog sector, which is the art market, and to create like more opportunities.
Fantastic. So I'm just
Good
going to
enough?
jump right in to my questions. You did such a great job. That's exactly why Alpha exists, to leverage access to
Yeah.
arts through technology. So I think my first question is more maybe to Gabi. I don't know, Thomas, if you have an interesting project that you'd like to highlight as well, we'd love to hear from you. And then for you as well, Renata. So can you please comment on a recent project that used technology to leverage the reach of a specific artist or show?
I think I'm on mute. Okay. This question's for me, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we work with a lot of different artists, but recently we worked with artist Andra Ursutta. She's a very prominent artist. Has actually had a solo show at the New Museum a couple of years ago, which was very cool. But she's been releasing this body of work called Nobodies, and they're these beautiful, intricate pieces of. She finds things in her studio that are strange and very organic, kind of violent looking, and she puts them together, and then we'll 3D scan that.
We have visuals of this initiative, right?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
let me share it.
They're actually pretty incredible works. They're very visceral, very intense, sometimes a little bit violent, but she'll put garbage basically together from her studio, and then we'll 3D scan this stuff. In the right, the one on the right are these like strange predator heads masks, Halloween masks. So we scan those, and then digitally we will precisely manipulate it the way she wants them to look. And then we'll 3D print it, and she'll send it over to 3D to cast in glass. So what's incredible is that she'll combine 3D scans of her body, things that she finds in her studio, expanding foam, and then she's able to have structurally sound 3D prints and structurally sound sculptures at the end, because we can strategically manipulate them in the software. It's and we're continuing to work with her to make sculptures for her next shows. So it's always very exciting to work with her. Yeah.
Fantastic. Renata, do you want to maybe tell people about this project? I think it's also a very cool use of 3D.
Sure. And although that was not created in collaboration with Gabi, I'm sure we can do amazing things like this together. This, in the case, is not the 3D printed sculpture. What you're seeing is like very large scale sculpture by Cuban artist Alex Arechea, and this is the 3D model that we created together in order to produce 3D printed miniatures of the work. It was a beautiful project. When we approached the artist, he was immediately very excited about this collaboration, as he wanted for a really long time to touch upon like different audiences like that normally wouldn't be able to purchase one of his real like life unique pieces. Real life too, but this is a miniature. It's about 30 centimeters. I don't know how tall in inches, but as you can see, it's like pretty.
Stick with centimeters.
Yeah.
That's the right way to do it, Renata. It's
Think
the right
in
way
centimeters.
Yeah, I think it's pretty similar to what you saw on the previous image, which is the large-scale sculpture, which was on Park Avenue back in 2015, if I'm not wrong. But yeah, like I think that's like the perfect example of the type of project that interests us at Alpha, because it brings together technology like in order to create a final product, an artwork that is more accessible to the general public, and that can be like easily like delivered to like many different geographical locations, yeah, like, and this is a limited edition, and like every other artwork that we have on the platform, it is more affordable, but it is a collectible.
Great. Thomas, my next question is for you. How has the way that artists connect with audiences changed in the past 5 years? During your time and experience in the market, what were the major changes that you observed?
Well, before we dive into that one, I wanted to just quickly go down this rabbit hole a little bit that you opened up with technology and artists using technology as a means to create. Because I think one of the things that has been getting a lot of coverage recently, at least from what I've seen, is all of these companies in the art market, all of these entities in the art market freaking out and trying to figure out, okay, well, how do you deal with the online world? How do you sell online and all of that stuff? But I don't think enough attention has really been paid to what do you do as an artist? If you're, and I don't mean to say that there's limitations in what you can do. There isn't. A lot of artists have studios and they're in their studios and they're doing great things in their studios. But how can an artist respond to this in a way that is interesting and in a way that is incorporating the opportunities that technology presents? And in a way, I can't help but think this is sort of an age-old question or collaboration, if you will, because artists have always been at the forefront of using brand new technology. Whether it was oils that were produced in the early 1800s, or if it was photography that was immediately conscripted into making incredible artwork, artists have always been at the forefront of saying, okay, well, what can I do with this technology that helps develop my craft or helps develop what I'm trying to say. So in many respects, it's the rest of the market kind of catching up with them, and I find it fascinating that we have two phenomenal examples of that, both with Alpha and WOMP, which it's just fantastic to see that this is a conversation that we're having, because I don't think many people are. Everybody else, well, maybe not everybody else, but so many people are just talking about the market and not about the creative side of it, which I think is obviously important, because there would be no market. In terms of what I've seen with how artists have tried to or have been pushing boundaries in having a stronger voice or doing some interesting things with technology to try and reach larger audiences, I do think that there's a lot that's happening just within the bread and butter kind of global online outreach. Anyone who didn't have an Instagram account definitely does now. And anyone who wasn't engaged with, if you're looking at galleries, for example, who wasn't engaged with a marketing platform like Artsy or like ArtNet or any of those companies, they absolutely are now as well. And that obviously then benefits the artists that they represent. And I would imagine a lot of artists are quite happy about those changes. So I think in terms of what individual artists are trying to do, within the past few years, 5 years or so, as you said, some of the biggest movements really are related to gaining larger direct audiences.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, Instagram played such a huge part in it once they they showed up. I remember there was a study back in the day when we had just started working as a company. So this was probably like 2015, saying that 73% of collectors thought that Instagram was bringing an unprecedented transparency into the art world. So in today's days, where we're seeing online art fairs with listed pricing, we're seeing online shows with listed pricing, I keep thinking how, you know, the gallerists are reacting to all of this, because this is a massive change of paradigm. And I think, you know, that's you that are more in contact maybe with, you know, the higher range of the market. How do you think these professionals are reacting to having these layers of transparency, which we never thought would really happen?
So I think it's an excellent point. I mean, with technology, or with greater scrutiny, if you will, there tends to be more transparency. And I think that's to the benefit of everybody. The art market needs transparency. Conversely, and working against that, is the fact that a large percentage, especially when you look at cash value, of transactions do not want transparency.
Yeah.
So you have this sort of unstoppable force and immovable object. I mean, they counter each other. I think there is some progress being made in some sectors. Obviously, ArtNet's entry into the space back in the 80s helped. And then the fact that there have been numerous other companies, sort of clone companies of that, I think that's helped. The biggest hole obviously being the private side of things, or the gallery side of things, with some relatively minor changes or developments there, where sometimes there's list prices, but rarely do those list prices represent reality. And in some cases, a gallery will sell to a collector at a deep discount because they know they want that piece in that collector's collection. So it's definitely headed in the right direction, but I don't think it's ever going to, I take that back. In the short term, I don't think it's going to necessarily fundamentally change. I think the only way the market is going to be pushed to a point of complete transparency is once greater regulation is introduced. And the fact that we're now seeing more and more value, despite what's happening over the past 6 months, there is so much more from a dollar point perspective, transactions going on within the art market. We're talking multiples of billions. It's by some estimates up to 100 billion when you factor in all of the different areas of the art market. That's a sizable market, and a lot of governments are right to say, okay, well, we should probably have a window in on that, and try and understand what's happening, where it's happening, who's involved in that. The UK, you're seeing that pick up with KYC and AML policies, which frankly should have been introduced all along. And the companies that I've run, I introduced them at the very beginning. And I'm not trying to say that to be like, oh, well done. I'm saying that because that's what you should do. That's the standard that you should hold yourself to, just like any other multi-$1,000 or hundreds of thousands or $1 million transaction. We're not there yet, is what I'm trying to say. I think
And just for everybody that's listening, KYC is basically a banking form called Know Your Client. So it's something that the banking industry has had in place for years, and you can't really make any investments before you fill out that simple questionnaire, which asks where your money comes from, basically.
Yeah.
Which
AML is anti-money laundering. It's not almond milk latte.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there's a lot to go. But anyway, Gabby, what about yourself? When you work with artists, do they like prices to be listed? Do they prefer to have hidden pricing? Do they prefer to reach out to their clients directly? Can you walk us through, maybe from the top, how it works when a client, an artist comes to WOMP and they want to put together an edition? How does that go?
That's a great question. So we've worked in collaboration with 5 artists who, at the very beginning, when we first founded the company, we started with a little collab, almost residency with us, where people could come with their ideas and we would produce and then sell together. the parts, the pieces, or the additions, and then have a little show to show some of the 3D technologies capabilities for art making. I think that when working with young artists, you'll see a lot of more openness about being able to be a little more flexible with transparency, with pricing, a little more flexible with the whole process. I think the traditional art world is a little less transparent about the general process, the pricing, I think in general, actually, the technology and new forms of manufacturing, new forms of art, and especially going into this kind of digitization of art is something that there's a lot of resistance in the art world and artists, and we see a greater openness with younger generations who are just kind of desperate to get their artwork out and to actually sell the work. So you see a lot of young artists really much more open to these ways, to posting online, to selling online, because they know that that's basically the future. And the startupization of art, the art world, is something I think is inevitable, and I think a lot of people resist it. But I think the startup world and the tech world and the art world will continue to merge together into something that will help young and struggling artists to get their incredible work made and sold. So we haven't experienced a lot of obfuscating pricing or process. A couple of artists, this is actually kind of interesting, but a couple of artists specifically don't want the term 3D printing or 3D manufactured to be part of their work's description. They prefer it to be, whatever the actual plastic is. So if it's PLA plastic, they'll write PLA plastic or nylon plastic or, powder, but they don't want it to say 3D printing, because sometimes for whatever reason, that's a faux pas for it to be 3D printed, as if it were kind of like a lame technological.
That's sad.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the materials, since you kind of like started there with the plastics? What are the available materials if I'm an artist today and I want to produce a piece?
Well, mostly the best flexibility, most interesting flexibility and materials will be in the plastics and resin. So actually plastic is a resin, which is something we learned early on, which is kind of weird, but the traditional plastic, like a Lego plastic, is actually considered a resin. So resins in general are the best, the 3D printing's strongest materials, the most intricate ones, the most flexibility. You can go from an extremely smooth piece to a cheaper, like layered piece. And there's a lot of variety there, but mostly what you see is the higher end, like powder printing, which I can tell that the piece that you are showing of the building is a powder printed piece. And then there's the liquid resin high resolution, which is also a higher end 3D print that comes, I'm sure everybody's seen like a piece growing out of a machine from a liquid vat. That's like an SLA print, which is a little bit more expensive. And then there's the cheapest, which is PLA, which we usually just use for prototyping. So I think, that powdered piece is probably a nylon SLS 3D print. So that gets printed in a bed of powder, which means that you can do highly complex things that won't necessarily break off because there's no supports or post-processing particularly needed with these pieces. So I like that technology a lot. But then there's also, metals 3D printing that we offer, and ceramic 3D printing. One of my favorite, obviously, is when people use the 3D print to cast. So casting in resins, casting in glass, like Andra Urseta does. So there's a lot, even though, like, we offer like 100 materials for people to print with. But what we see a lot is that people would choose some of the more affordable plastics or some of the more flexible plastics, and then they'll use that to either cast or create something in another material. And I love seeing that because it actually explores the full range of what the technology offers. So being able to design a complex mold or complex system for something to be poured and to be extracted, it makes it very exciting to what the possibilities are with the technology.
Fantastic. Renata, can you talk a little bit more as well about mediums that, are really leveraged by technology and experiences that, we've had in the past with our artists and our collectors in terms of pricing as well, since we talked about that.
Yeah, definitely. I think I wanted to add anyways about pricing because if you go on our website, you're gonna notice that most of our prints range are within a range of like $100 to $1,200. And the reason for that is that we usually work with artists in a way that like we adapt the size of the edition so we can maintain prices more accessible. And the way we do, we usually use like the price of a unique piece as a base, and then we divide that price for the number of prints like for that edition. And I think that's like a very fair way to price our artwork. So like people, like even if you're like selling something by a more established artist, you still can own an art piece, like, and it's not going to devalue the work of that artist. And I think another thing which is interesting that we've been doing since inception is doing adapting price to the sales of that art piece. How price based on scarcity. Is that it?
Yeah, that's it.
Sorry, my brain's still working in Portuguese. So prices go up in value like as that art piece sells. So that's another very interesting thing. And I think also like relating like a little bit to the secondary market, now that we're gonna start using blockchain to certificate the art pieces, like thinking in the future, not right now, but like how we can guarantee that that artist is gonna profit when his or her artwork goes very much up in value, which is the case of like an artwork that goes to an auction house, like that sells again on the secondary market.
Yeah, so basically once one of our pieces ends up in Thomas's auction house, the artist is also going to make a share of the sale, and everybody's happy.
That's interesting that you guys are going to use blockchain. I always thought blockchain and the art world would work well or not well together because of the obfuscation of like, that's exactly it. Like there's that battle between transparency and something really interesting that I actually experienced in the art world was that of course, Jeff Koons, when he bought a Picasso or he bought whatever he was buying, it was actually a vehicle for the valuation of that piece to go up. So they put together a fund just for Jeff to purchase things and then resell them with the title of Jeff Koons's Picasso, Jeff Koons, whatever. And that is insane.
Provenance. But that's another thing that blockchain is really valuable for, and that's one of the biggest use cases out there. It's just building out provenance and simplifying the life of the collector once he wants to resell that piece, because there's a very clear chain of custody from inception till that end sale, and that's, in my opinion, the best use of blockchain.
Yeah, well, it's a great democratizing tool, right? Because you don't need to rely on a network or being part of some kind of almost conspiratorial gallery world to be able to access the actual provenance of something, or being able to make sure that you're buying something that's legitimate. But I think that there is a counterintuitive part to like the New York City art scene, or it's a little bit of a battle against that. I like it. I think it's good. I think it's better. I actually think that artists shouldn't have to manufacture the work before they sell it. I think we should have 3D models. People can preview, and then it gets manufactured as they get sold.
That's what we do.
You don't have to invest.
That's exactly what we do.
Yeah, that's
all of our works are produced after they are sold, which doesn't place a monetary cost on top of the artist, because this is very true, especially
and it
for
keeps your overhead down. You don't have to store things. You don't have to store inventory.
Yeah,
exactly.
Which is a
100%.
huge problem. I have all my paintings in the background. They follow me. Yeah.
Thomas, my next question is for you. So, and this is very on point with the discussion that we're having now. We know that the art world is still extremely analog, even with everything that's going on with coronavirus and how they're being forced to be virtual because it's the only way to connect. But how does it feel to be the tech guy when you're surrounded by these traditional people? Have you suffered? You probably have some interesting stories if Thomas walks into the room.
It's a challenge. I'm not going to pretend it isn't. It is, because and it presents itself in multiple ways. On the one hand, it can be charming in a way. When you start talking about websites, you start talking about anything that is customer facing, Instagram or branding, anything related to broader marketing initiatives. Pretty much everybody in the art market has an opinion. Because it's visual. It's something that is like, oh, can I get a look at the website? I want to see what the website is going to look like. I need to make sure it looks good. You're like, do you though? Do you? But they just, because they want, understandably, they have a passion. Everybody's in the arts because they enjoy aesthetics and they want to understand what's happening. But having an appreciation of aesthetics is important, but understanding UX and UI is important. And understanding why something is placed where it is placed is also important. And having that conversation with someone who's purely looking at it from an aesthetic perspective can be a challenge, but also kind of, in a way, endearing. On the other hand, there's also the perceived limitations of technology. You guys were just talking about blockchain, and I think that's a perfect example. I think there are absolutely applications for blockchain, but the market and the people involved have to buy into it, especially when you're dealing with physical assets that live outside of the blockchain. They live in the real world, not in the digital world. So you're constantly beholden upon any transaction, anyone involved in that transaction, essentially recording that transaction on the blockchain. Whereas with physical objects, it's too easy to not do that, to just go around the back of a warehouse and say, hey, buddy, you want to buy this? And then not record that transaction on a blockchain. In some respects, it's despite the fact that I agree, I think blockchain could be good for the market and good for transparency, but the market doesn't inherently want it. Similarly, there are things like CRMs or broader customer data gathering companies or initiatives or software that a lot of people will question. They'll say, well, you're gathering all of this data about our clients, and it's going to tell me something I already know. I already know my client. I already know that they want X or they want Y, and that kind of really defeats the point, and it limits your ability to actually gather and analyze data. So in some areas there's an appreciation for what technology can do, and in other areas there's still a deep skepticism. I do think that that's changed fairly rapidly in the past couple of months. The needle's definitely swung over to the other side, but even then, that doesn't mean that there isn't. That's based on fear. It's not based on a realization that it's a useful technology. It's just based on fear of not being able to participate.
Yeah, a fear of missing out digitally.
Well, I think it's kind of similar to what we experience with people resisting 3D printing as a medium for creating artwork. I think it's this fear. I mean, the art world is always kind of resisting the technological advances and what is considered art, what is good art, what is kind of lame or too technology dependent art, tech art, right, versus real good art. It's since the art world is like such a sensitive, almost like persona that you have to navigate and can't just kind of, it's not like the tech world that's only, the art world pretends not to be about money because it has this extra layer, and the tech world is just all about data. So it makes it easier to navigate the tech world in a way because it's just all about traction, all about data, all about money. Whereas the art world has this additional emotional layer of good versus bad, of
But at the
high
same
versus
time,
low.
like there's so many artists which like Frank Stella, Jeff Koons, which are such big names, and they've been at the forefront. Frank Stella has been using 3D printing forever. And
Yeah.
you know, and you mentioned Jeff Koons, which was the person to inspire you to open up the shop. So I think it's more about information and
Yeah.
releasing the stigma than anything else. And I think, you know, just to jump in, and Renata, you can probably help me out on this one. What we find in terms of resistance from a new artist when we're bringing them onto the platform is it's very easy to work with early stage artists and late career. The biggest issue always lies in mid-career because that's where most of the insecurity lives, because they've probably just landed their first gallery show. They think that, you know, doing this technological thing might hurt their personal brand or their image. So here, why don't you tell them a little bit more about, you know, the challenges that we've faced over the past 5 years and how they've changed?
Yeah, no, absolutely. But just to refer to what Gabby had said before about artists not wanting to put on the description of that artwork that it was a 3D printed piece. I think like there's a idea of like purchasing something because like you love what you see versus like what you project on it and like what you want that piece to be. So of course there is like prejudice like about the different materials. And one thing that we feel a lot is when we're explaining about our work to different artists or even collectors, they ask about the technique we use when we're producing our prints. And a lot of people tend to be a bit resistant to digital prints, which is what we do. But the reality is that the technology has improved so much that if you get a digital print in your hands, like it's like the quality is like fantastic. You know, you can see the almost like different layers. Like it's pretty amazing what it has become. But like, of course, that idea that like maybe like a silk screen is like better quality, you know. And so I think it's like really like a challenge for everyone to separate like what you think that idea is and what the reality is, because like things have evolved, like, and technology has improved so much in the past, like, I don't know, few years only. And I think for us in our trajectory, what was very clear was in the beginning, people would receive like our ideas like, you're completely insane, why are you doing that, you know, just like you're gonna go bankrupt like very soon, like no one is gonna want what you're selling. And then like gradually they're like, yeah, maybe that's gonna work. And nowadays, especially now during the pandemic, like everyone's like, yeah, it makes so much sense to have a business online, like, and you know, like in this this type of production that you have, that like even Gabby was saying, yeah, maybe artists shouldn't produce before they sell. Yeah, artists shouldn't produce before they sell, like, and there shouldn't be like an investment, because that ends up being an obstacle for them to produce more, you know, because they have to have space to store their artwork, the artworks they're producing, and they have to like invest in materials if they want to like, you know, do an edition. And with us, everything is stored on our cloud, and we only produce once we receive an order, and we ship that artwork directly to the client. who is very close to the printer and framer. We always end up choosing different people to work with us depending on the final location of that delivery. And yeah, like my job is practically mostly approaching artists and suggesting collaborations, and I definitely feel that my job has become much easier in the past month or so, because people are seeing more value in having a presence online, and they are seeing more value also like in sharing about their different worlds through webinars like the one we are doing right now, because they need a way to connect, like, and I don't even know if like for them it's a good marketing resource, or if it's just like the pure necessity of connecting with people and sharing, you know, like being an artist is something that you don't normally choose, like it comes to you, like, you know, it's like bigger than like rationality, like, and I think like they have the need to share like what they're feeling and doing with other people, and especially now that everyone's feeling so much. So I think it's interesting, like it's just like a natural development for things that we are already doing before.
Yeah, fantastic. No, I just want to say if you know, if you have a question, now is your time. Type it into the chat and we'll get to you in a minute. We have a few more minutes left in the discussion. It's been flowing so quickly, but we're almost at time. So I'm just gonna I have like one more round of questions, and then if anybody has questions, please throw them in the chat. Just one second. Oh, yeah, of course. We couldn't forget this question, Gabby, because as we mentioned, when we went through our process of producing our first 3D printed sculpture, the modeling process was so complicated, so expensive. And you know, and we could understand why there were barriers to creatives trying to you know, to come into this space. Can you talk a little bit about the resources necessary? How does the modeling process work, and how it compares to scanning as well?
I think I need to bring you with me to all my pitch events and all my pitching meetings, because I don't think people understand what the barriers are today, what the process looks like for an artist or anyone really to create an object through digital manufacturing. It's a nightmare. It's so expensive. You need a designer, you need an engineer, you need somebody who understands materials, and then you need the person who manufactures. So that's actually the essence of what we're building today. We're building a smart platform that democratizes the whole process, so anyone can go and manufacture their parts, design, scan, manipulate the 3D model, and actually purchase it all in one place. So our interest right now, we're still in development for our platform because it's a 3D engine that we're designing from scratch. But we've incorporated a layer of services as well onto that are more traditional in the process that you've just discussed, with like basically having to work one-on-one with the person who will help you develop your file. But traditionally, I think if anyone here today wanted to start a 3D model, having to go and find a 3D sculptor, let's say, or a 3D modeler, you'd have to understand what kind of 3D model do you need for manufacturing. Do you want a digital sculptor model? Do you want like an actual mechanical file, like the building that you guys produced? You might think that you want a digital sculptor at the beginning, but you actually want someone who does more of solids designing. So that's already on its own hard to understand which one of the 3D models you want or modelers you need. Then you need to pay that person by the hour. So they have to give you an initial, it's just like the issues with consulting. It's just like not a friendly thing for somebody who's not a very wealthy individual or a company who can afford to have the flexibility of an hourly rate contractor. And then you have to go and make sure that that contractor understands how to model things properly for 3D printing, which is by far probably the biggest hurdle. So our software allows people to be able to analyze the files as they're 3D modeling them, to be able to see what materials are compatible with the 3D model they're making and what the price is going to be for making it. So I think even like incorporating our software with your platform and allowing people to cross design and offer and that kind of stuff is kind of the future of what we hope our company will be. Is just a tool that democratizes the whole process and allows anyone really to create without having to go through all those hurdles. And I'm sure you guys have understand very well what I mean with trying to communicate your thoughts to somebody who also you are hoping understands the process and the ultimate result that you want, just like with anything else with consulting, is very difficult. So we hope that a hybrid between the user being able to manipulate and create files and also being able to work with someone, our team, our engineers, our designers, to create 3D models is ultimately, hopefully, a successful platform.
Fantastic.
Yep.
So this is the last question to Thomas, and then we're gonna have to wrap up. It came from the chat. How can arts technology help bring out art appreciation with the non-artistically inclined? Really helping with democratization of the arts. Like, how can you bring in someone that is inclined to not like the arts through technology, basically?
That's a difficult one. I mean, it might not be technology necessarily, but there's been numerous articles recently about how art, not just how art can respond to the crisis, but also how art can help people deal with the crisis on an emotional, on a mental kind of well-being level. And I think getting that message across to people, helping them understand and process what is an incredible moment in history. I mean, there's so much that is going on right now that is very difficult to get your head around, very, very difficult to process. People are having weird ass dreams, and they need a way of they need help to process that, and art can be one of the things that does that, and whether that's by being exposed to it or learning about it or understanding it at a level through technology while you're still in quarantine, or if that's coming out the other end and going to recently open museums and trying to understand what did we just go through, and maybe realizing that we're not alone, both in terms of contemporary artists producing works as a response to what happened, but also through art history and moments in art history where there were deep psychological changes or implications that artists responded to. So I'm not sure if that necessarily answers the question on how technology can help, but I think in a way it's broader than that. It's like, how can art help? How can art kind of be a conduit to processing some of these things?
Can I add to that?
Of course.
I'm gonna have to jump though, but I'll see you guys soon. Thanks.
See you soon.
Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Thomas.
Thanks. Bye.
Renata's gonna wrap us up.
Yeah, so I think what Thomas just explained is very, very interesting. And it made me think of this special initiative we have at Alpha when we use the visual art to communicate important messages around a theme, either in sustainability or a social cause. And we always end up asking artists to create, like, thinking about that theme, but like also like what we try to do is select artworks that have a more optimistic approach to the subject, even like when the subject is heavy, like plastic pollution or like dead zones, like the ocean, you know, like things that like are normally very like something that like you would like want to like talk about, you know, that like you consider to be like ugly, like in a way. But artists have the power to really create and to do beautiful things from those like not very pleasant subjects. And I think like what we're living right now, you know, it's such like an important moment in history, like, and we're all going through this together. So maybe like art is like the way for us to feel that we're not alone, and that together we can like navigate what is happening like in a easier way. And I think like just like to add like more like on the technology side, like what I would say is that like technology is the way that people interact with art, like, and I think the fact that we've been all we have the possibility of like doing that from the comfort of our homes, like a familiar space, you know, we're more at ease like when we are interacting with art, like, and we feel more open to like maybe raising our hands and asking questions when we are like in conversation with smaller groups of people, like what we're doing today. And whenever like we are hosting our webinars, like when I'm introducing the idea to the artists that I've been interviewing, like my point is always like, just say whatever is coming from your heart, you know, because like, you know, like the more real you get, the more interesting it is. Like it doesn't need to be something very brainy, like it doesn't need to be something like, you know, like a very sophisticated type of language. When you speak from your heart and you're honest on your answers, like I think that's captivating and that's what people want. So like don't try to do anything that is far away from that.
Perfect. Gabby, any last minute thoughts to wrap us up?
No, I'm just very excited about what you guys are building. I think that when I graduated school in 2008, I would have been very excited to put my stuff up on your site, and I can't believe that this doesn't exist already. So congrats.
Fantastic. And we'll put together some editions very soon in 3D.
Oh, awesome.
With a seamless process. So if you're an artist and you're interested in doing 3D printed sculptures, reach out to us, reach out to Gabby. We are very interested. It's a fantastic medium. We love objects, and you know, it's amazing. You get immediate feedback from your work.
Yeah, let's make some stuff.
Let's make some stuff. Okay, guys, thank you so much. And we'll see you all soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.